Hello, my name is Darren Thomas, and I am the Director of Educational Research Techniques. In this video, we're going to learn a little bit about how to make scatter plots using Plotly in R. So let's go ahead and see what we can learn. So I'm inside RStudio, and we're going to make some scatter plots like I just mentioned. So let's go ahead and take a look at the packages we're going to be using first. So in the upper left-hand corner, you can see the three packages that we will be using. Of course, Plotly is the star. In line number 2, we got ECDAT. ECDAT is economic data. So we're going to pull a little play data set from this particular package. PSID actually is what we're going to use. And then, of course, our last library here is going to be dplyr, which is what we're going to use for data manipulation. So I just already loaded my packages, and we're going to now take a look at our first little simple piece of code here. So in lines 5 through 7, we have our first example. So the data set we're using is PSID. This has some data about, age, income, etc. First here, we're going to use our function called Plotly, plot_ly. This right here is my X and Y axis. So hours, number of hours that the people worked. Y is going to be the earnings. And the last one here is our add markers. This is what's going to actually make the actual scatter plot, if you will. That's the indication for that. So I press Control Enter. Give it a second. And you can see right here that we have our little scatter plot. Notice how whenever you hover over one of the dots, you get the X and the Y axis values. So the X axis is hours, the Y axis is earnings. And so you can see how that's giving you that information. Again, I forgot to mention this, but one of the benefits and power of Plotly is the interactive dynamic nature of it, if you will. And that's where this comes in handy. So for our next little star here, we're going to show you some of the features, some of the ways you can modify and tweak your plot. So here, the first two lines, lines 9 and 10, are pretty much the same. There's nothing new here. We're still doing hours versus earnings. That's probably going to be happening throughout the video. And then right here inside add markers, we have some new information. So what we're doing here is we're changing the marker. In other words, instead of having the dot that you can see to your right, we're going to have a diamond. So that's what's going to be happening inside this list function. And then we're also changing the size of it. Now, I'm changing the size so that it's easier to see it in the video, but for simplicity's sake, you don't have to use the size argument if you don't want to. So go ahead here, press Control Enter, see if it runs. All right, you can see that for yourself. Notice how the little marks are much bigger now, and they're also diamonds because we specified that in our code in line number 11. So it's right there, you can see for yourself. Okay, let's move to our next one. So for the next one, we're going to add color. And so we're going to try to distinguish people by their marital status. And we're also going to change the colors as well. So you can see right here, starting in line 13, all the way to line 18. So these first two lines, lines 13 and 14, are the same. And so right here, we're adding something new. We're going to color it by married. One other thing I have to mention for those of you who are ggplot2 fans, notice how we have this little tilde sign in front of our variables. So that is something unique to Plotly. And the tilde sign, again, speaking to people who are completely new at this, is right next to the number 1 on your keyboard. If you press Shift, you'll see it. So next to the number 1, below Escape, the Escape button. Now, moving back here in line 16, we still have our diamond. We still have our size in line 17, 14. And then now we added something else, colors. So you can have different color themes, if you will. And that's how you adjust this. So I go ahead and I'm going to run lines 13 through 18. Press Control Enter. And you can see over here off to the left here, or to the right, excuse me, that we have the color. And so up here in the upper right hand corner, you can see the different marital statuses right here. And you can also see how the colors have changed from the boring blue. So that's what's happening right here. So we have several different options here for the marital status, and you can see that as well. And so when you hover over it, you can see the marital status like so, and that's how it is. All right, for our next trick, we're going to continue with this. We're going to look at symbols now. So let me explain to you what's going to happen here. So what's going to happen now is that instead of changing by color, we're going to change the shape. So you can see instead of having the word color here, like we did in line 15, we now have the word symbol. And so now we're going to have different symbols based on marital status. That's what's new here. So I press Control Enter. Okay. And so you can see now, instead of, we have color, but we didn't specify color. That's just part of this. But notice how everything's a different shape. So if they're divorced, it's a plus sign. If they're married, it's a blue circle. If they're widowed, it's a green square. That's what's new here. And so you can see how things are changing based on what we're doing. All right, next one. Getting towards the end here almost. So I'll show you the code for this one. Okay, so in this one, we're going to have a hover label, which is going to provide us with information. So notice something here. We have still hours and earning. The text is married. So that's what's going to be in the little hover. This will make sense when you see it. We have add markers again, because that's for Scatterplot. And then the layout is going to be this hover label, which you're going to see in a second, with the list. And all we're specifying is the font size. And again, I'm making the font size bigger for the video. You wouldn't necessarily have to do this, but this is just for the camera, for the screen. So there we go. All right, now watch when I hover over something. Now it tells me several things here in a nice big giant blue box here. It tells me the X value, it tells me the Y value, and it tells me their status for the categorical variable of marriage, or married, if you will. So each time this person is divorced right here, this person is married, this person over here is divorced, this one has no history. You can see how it changes each time. So that's the power of that. Now, getting very close to the end, we're going to try to look at something a little bit different where we tweak the actual information that is inside the little hover label that you just saw. So this is a little bit more complicated, but don't get discouraged. So in line 32, we've seen this several times. I do not have to explain this. Then now we have something called hover info. We're going to define what is inside the hover label based on what we put in the next line. So we're going to say the hover information is going to contain something from an argument or an object that we're going to make called text. And so text is going to contain all this information right here. And so what the hover label is going to tell us is the hours, the earnings, and the marital status. That's what it's going to tell us, all these things at once. And so right here, you can see that you set up the hours by typing it like this with a little semicolon. If you want the, not semicolon, but colon, if you want it. And we're going to define that with hours, the actual variable. This BR here puts a break in it. So if you're familiar with HTML, this is like, okay, put a break. It's like pressing enter, if you will. Then earnings is going to be next. So we're going to have the text called earnings. And then after that, we're going to have the actual variable called earning. And then we're going to have married. Now, this stuff in line 39, add markers, makes the actual scatter plot. And then the layout, we saw this before. You have to tell it what the hover label is going to look like. And so it's going to have a list with the font size, and the list is going to be 30. We've seen this before. Again, I'm only manipulating the font size for the video. You may not have to do that compared to the other stuff. All right. So there we go. Now you can see here. Now before we had these values, you know, hours and earning, but we didn't have the actual name of the x-axis and the name of the y-axis. That's what's different here. And again, we could have put in different values or other information if we wanted to. And so you can also see how we have 3 lines here. So if you look at line 34 in the code, this is our first line, hours. Then we have the BR, this is our break, like pressing enter. Then we have earnings, that's our second line. Then we have the BR, that means break. And then we have marital status, if you will. And so that's why we have these 3 lines here, because that's how we coded it. Also, we have the add markers because we wanted a scatter plot. We have the hover label here, and the font size is 30 because that's what we indicated in our code. So everything is lining up. You can read this code from top to bottom on the left-hand side, and you can see how it's being inputted right here inside our scatter plot here to the right. Now, for our last trick, we're going to show you how to add a regression line. So this is going to have a lot of information in it. Okay, here's what's happening. In line 43, we're making a simple regression model. This is something beyond the scope of this video, but we're just going to call it an object called M. That's it. Now, for the PSID now, what we're doing now is we are pulling our information here using some tools from dplyr. So selecting hours, earning, and married. If there's any missing values, which I don't think there is, we're going to omit those. Then all this information right here, you've seen it before. This is all something we just looked at in the prior plots. So making our hover label, what we want in the hover label, etc. Now, add markers, this is all the same. The only thing that's new is that we are removing the legend because we don't want that there because that information is captured inside our text here for our hover label. And then one more thing is we're going to add a line and we're going to use fitted. That's what we call this right here. And we're using our object M, which is what we created up here in line 43. That's it. So that's our actual regression line. So we're going to add all this we're going to do all this together. Press Control Enter. All right, there we go. You can see all the information here. Notice how the box is smaller because I didn't control the size of the font. And also our real star here is this red line right here. I hope you can see. And you can see that as we go up the red line, it gives us values for the estimation. And that's how that works. So when you get out here, it's red because there's no points on the line right there. And so that's what we have there. So that's our regression line, the best fitting line for this particular scatter plot. So let me see if I can kind of summarize what we talked about and wrap up this particular video. So in this video, we learned about how to go about making a scatter plot using Plotly in the R Studio environment. And so with this information, you can, of course, make your scatter plot, which is, of course, the most basic thing you can do. And then you can also tweak it. You can change the color. You can change the shape of the dots. You can add hover over information that you can customize for your own purposes. You can change the font size of that hover over label information. And of course, you can also set up a regression line as you so desire when you're doing this. So this is just some of the really cool tools that you can use when you're doing Plotly. And remember, that Plotly is primarily interactive, I didn't talk about this too much in the video, but if you look up here at the top, you can clearly see that you can zoom and pan if you so desire, if that's what you really want to do. And we've talked about this in prior videos. In this video, I kind of focused on some of the tools you can use. But again, don't forget these options up here in the upper right-hand corner about how you can resize the actual scatter plot. And you can use that for your own benefits and purposes. So I want to thank you so much for watching. My name is Darren Thomas. I am the Director of Educational Research Techniques. Thank you for watching, and you take care.